Howdy folks, and welcome to the War Thunder Ground Forces closed beta test with the mighty Jingles. I thought we'd kick things off by showing you what is currently in the beta test. And there is not a lot here. Right? This is just a very, very small taste of what you can expect when this thing rolls out at full release. And I must emphasize, right, this is in no way representative of final gameplay. There's only a tiny fraction of what's going to be in the full release currently in the beta. Now, of course, I do realise the utter futility of my saying this, even as I'm saying it, because people are going to bitch and whine about the unfinished game being unfinished, regardless of any caveat that I put up at the start of the video. But it needs to be said, you're looking at unfinished, very limited game content, and it does need to be judged as such. So, having said that, and understanding the futility of saying it in the first place, let's have a look at the tech trees. There is not a massive amount of content available in the beta at the moment. The only ground forces that are currently available are some very low-level German and Russian vehicles. The American tech tree, aviation, is fully in the game, but you can't use them, as is the same with the British and the Japanese. If you were to look at the American tech tree, there it is. Same with the British, same with the Japanese. You cannot play any of the random battles on the test server with the British, the Americans, or the Japanese. It's purely the Germans, and they only have their reserve aircraft, and the Russians, and they also only have their reserve aircraft. But the Germans and the Russians have an extra tab on the research tree that is not available for the Americans, the British, or the Japanese. And there it is, the ground forces. So we've got a T-70, which looks like this. It's a rank 1 light tank with a 1.7 battle rating. We have the KV-1, which looks like this. That's a rank 2 heavy tank with a battle rating of 3.3. And we have the T-34, the 1941 variant, which obviously means there are going to be other variants of the T-34 in the game. And that's a rank 2 medium tank with a battle rating of 2.7. And it looks like that. That's it for the Russians. Again, not a massive amount of content. If we go to the Germans, we have, in fact I can show you straight from here, there it is, the Stug 3F. That's a rank 2 tank destroyer with a battle rating of 3.3. The Panzer IV F2, a rank 2 medium tank with a battle rating of 3.3. The Panzer IV Model C, which is a rank 1 medium tank with a battle rating of 2. Panzer IIc, which is a rank 1 light tank with a battle rating of 1, and the Flak Panzer I, which is a rank 1 anti-aircraft tank with a battle rating of 1.7. And that is quite literally it. That's all that is available at this early stage of the Ground Forces beta test. So let's take a quick look at the modification process for the various different vehicles here in Ground Forces, and they all pretty much follow the same pattern. We'll start off by looking at the Stug, and there it is, and this should be immediately familiar to anybody who's played War Thunder Air Forces. You've got various different unlocks, rank 1, 2, 3 and 4 unlocks. In order to unlock the rank 2 unlocks, you need to have unlocked a certain number of the rank 1s, and so on and so on and so on. And you can see that I'm about well, not really halfway, I'm about a third of the way through the upgrade process here on the Stug 3F. I've unlocked the tracks, I've unlocked the suspension, I've unlocked the camouflage, I've unlocked fire adjustment, and I've unlocked one of the ammunition types. I'm working now on the turret drive, which is going to improve the smoothness of the movement of the turret traverse and increase its speed. Well, obviously the Stug doesn't have a turret, but it improves the gun traverse of the main gun. Main gun, 75mm KWK-40 L43 cannon. Carries 54 rounds of ammunition. Now, speaking of ammunition, by default, on these tank guns, you get two different ammunition choices available at the start, and those are your armor piercing and your high explosive. If you mouse over the ammo choices, you'll see what you have unlocked. So by default, there it is. That's the armor piercing capped ballistic shell, standard armor piercing ammo for the German 75mm gun, and it tells you exactly what the penetration of the gun is at various different ranges. At point blank range, 10 meters, it'll penetrate 105mm of armor, ranging all the way up to 2000 meters range, when at best it's only going to manage 44mm of penetration. The second ammunition choice that's available by default is high explosive, and there it is down there. The other ones are all individual unlocks as part of the tech tree, so you can see that I have unlocked the HLGR38B shell, which doesn't tell you an awful lot. However, if you go to the ammo choices, there it is. This is a high explosive anti-tank shell, and high explosive anti-tank has the same penetration at all ranges. And you can see there in the pop-up 87mm of penetration, whether it's at 10 meters or 2000 meters. So unlike, for example, in World of Tanks, where generally speaking high explosive anti-tank ammo, which is premium ammunition in World of Tanks, is way better than your standard armor piercing, that's not the case here in War Thunder Ground Forces. At point blank range and at very close ranges, I'd be far better off using normal armor piercing ammo. As you can see, at 500 meters, it has 95mm of penetration, significantly better than that at shorter ranges. The high explosive anti-tank is only really better than the armor piercing at ranges of 1000 meters and more, where that solid 87mm of penetration overtakes the reduced penetration at longer ranges of standard armor piercing ammo. And this pattern's going to continue with all the different ammunition unlocks. There is no really clear best ammunition to use in general. All of the ammunition has its own strengths and weaknesses depending on the range that you're engaging the enemy at, or even how quickly the enemy is moving. As I'll show you what I mean when we move on to the first of the APCR ammunition unlocks, armor piercing composite rigid, which traditionally is ammunition that has higher penetration values than normal armor piercing ammo, but like normal armor piercing ammo, the penetration ranges decrease with distance. And the first APCR ammo unlock that we get is here, the PZGR40W. However, the penetration is worse across the board than the standard armor piercing ammo. At 10 meters, standard armor piercing has 105mm of penetration. This stuff only has 80. At 2000 meters, this stuff has 30mm. Standard armor piercing has 44mm. Standard armor piercing ammo has better penetration across the board than the first unlock of APCR ammunition. So you must obviously thinking to yourself, well, what the hell's the point of using this ammo? Well, look at the muzzle velocity. This stuff travels at 930 meters per second. The standard armor piercing travels at 740 meters per second. So you would want to use this ammunition if you were engaging a fast-moving target at long range, because you wouldn't have to lead the target as much while shooting at it with this kind of ammo. Then, of course, the final ammunition unlock is the really good armor-piercing composite rigid ammo. It has way better penetration across the board, as well as having much, much higher muzzle velocity. So, as you can see, there is no real clear best ammunition type to use at all times here in War Thunder Ground Forces. You really have to mix and match and choose the ammunition type that you're going to use depending entirely on the situation in which you find your machine. Now, the rest of the unlocks do pretty much exactly what you would expect them to do. You've got your mobility upgrades like tracks, suspension, brakes, engine, protection upgrades like camouflage and extra armor. The firepower upgrades we've mostly actually already looked at. They're the ammunition box unlocks, as well as things like the turret drive, fire adjustment and the elevation mechanism. But there is one upgrade that's available, well, certainly for medium tanks and light tanks and anti-aircraft artillery. In fact, let's have a quick look and see if it's available for heavy tanks as well. And I know this is going to be controversial. Oh, right. Heavy tanks don't appear to have this option, and I know you're all sitting there saying, what option, Jingles, what option? Well, this is going to be controversial. I have it unlocked on the Flak Panzer, but you can also get it on the medium tanks as well, and it's there. Artillery support. Now, so far, and I don't believe they plan to implement it, there is no option to drive self-propelled guns in War Thunder, so no artillery. And yet there sort of is, because as you can see here, my Flak Panzer has unlocked the ability to call in an artillery barrage as a rank 4 unlock. And it works, well, very simply. It works just like any of your ammunition choices, and it has a cooldown. And you'll see me using it in some of the games that you're going to see. And you literally point at a spot on the map, press the button, and a couple of seconds later, the area that you've targeted gets hit by an artillery barrage. Now, I'm sure this is going to have its fans and its detractors, but it's in the game, like it or not. And it certainly makes, well, for example, if you're in your Flak Panzer and you've shot down all of the enemy aircraft and nobody else wants to jump into an aircraft, well, the Flak Panzer is not particularly useful with its 20mm cannon. But it does mean that vehicles like this, or like the Panzer II, which only has a 20mm gun as well, good luck penetrating a KV-1 with a 20mm gun. In fact, in a lot of cases, good luck penetrating a KV-1 with a 50mm gun. And vehicles like this, which also get that unlock, there it is, artillery support, can still be useful beyond their, their obvious scouting role by using this to damage larger enemy targets when they wouldn't otherwise be able to. So, as well as new equipment unlocks for the ground vehicles, there are also new crew training options for the ground vehicles. So if, for example, we have a look at the Panzer IIc, we can see that we have crew slots for gunner, driver, tank commander, tank loader, and radio operator gunner. Now, quite clearly, a machine as small as a Panzer IIc does not have 5 crew. However, and again, this is kind of like the gunner slot, for example, on a bomber crew in aircraft. Just because the aircraft that you have selected does not have gunners does not mean that every aircraft that you have in that crew slot is not going to be a bomber or an attack aircraft with an additional gunner. So in exactly the same way, not every tank that you're going to have in this crew slot is going to have a driver and a gunner and a tank commander and a tank loader and a radio operator gunner, but some of the tanks that you put in that slot will. So, the options are there. The Panzer IIc, I don't know how many crew it has, certainly no more than 3. The information is not available in-game yet. I'm sure it will be on release, but it's definitely got a driver, it's definitely got a commander. It might also have a gunner, but the tank commander might have to do the gunner's job anyway. Although it's possible it is driver, gunner and tank commander. I'm sure that information's available out there somewhere. It's not available in-game. But the point is, I could, for example, I'll send that crew slot to a holiday, and I could load the Panzer IV into this position. In which case, if we go back to ground vehicles, then I'm going to need the driver, gunner, tank commander, tank loader and a radio operator. And you can see the various different skills that the various different crew members have available to them. Now, let me just put this back the way it was. And one other thing, and this is purely for the beta, it's obviously not going to be a concern when the game is fully polished and fully finished and is ready for release. But if you do anticipate getting into the closed beta, there's a couple of things that you're going to need to know. The first thing that you're going to need to do before you hit that battle button is go into game options and the controls, and you can see a new tab here for tank control. You're going to need, as stupid as this may sound, you're going to need to set up a button for your tank fire button, because I was very, very upset the very first time I hit the battle button to find out that pressing my left mouse button didn't fire my gun. As well as that, you're also going to need to click the miscellaneous tab over here and scroll down to these action buttons, action 1, 2, 3, 4 and 5, and assign them to well, by default, I have set them up for keyboard buttons 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. This is very, very important. By default, these are blank. What these do, these select your different ammo types, and for example, your artillery support unlock. And again, this caught me out. The very first time I unlocked a new ammunition type for my Stug, I thought, oh, fantastic, now I've got high explosive anti-tank shells, hit the battle button, and had no way of loading my high explosive anti-tank shells because I hadn't set button 2 to action 2, which activates your second ammunition slot. So this is things that you're going to need to do if you get into the beta before you hit that random battle button, or you're going to be very, very frustrated and disappointed. So best you know now, then you have to find out the hard way, like I did. And again, this is purely just it's a beta test thing. It's an oversight. I'm sure it'll be fixed in the future, and there's no way they're going to let the game ship with that kind of glaring omission in place. So there you go. Now, here at the vehicle and ammunition selection screen at the start of a battle, this is another peculiarity of the whole thing still being in beta. You can see I can mix and match and choose which ammunition types I want to carry into battle on my flak panzer. What it doesn't tell me is exactly what kind of ammunition I am selecting. I know that I have unlocked, for example, high velocity armor piercing ammo, which is the only ammo that's really practical to use in a flak panzer against enemy tanks. I know that I've also unlocked high explosive fragmentation incendiary tracer ammo, which is your ideal anti-aircraft ammunition, but on the pre-battle selection screen it doesn't tell you which is which. Or at least it doesn't tell you which is which yet. I do expect that to be something that changes in future patches. But for the moment, again, another top tip for anybody who's planning to get into the beta test, before you press that battle button, make sure you know exactly what each ammunition type does. Because at the moment, all the game gives you at the pre-battle loading screen is the ammunition designation without actually telling you what kind of ammunition it is. And as you can see by this mess going on in front of me, just because this is the beta test server does not mean that utter arseholes can't play too. You can see by that Stug driver just being a douchebag in front of me. And when he's finished with that Stug, he's going to have a go at me too. So yeah, if you run into Atomic Brew on the test server and he's on your team, you pretty much know exactly what to expect. And wouldn't it be terrible if anything bad happened to him? But he did at least do me the favour of allowing me to demonstrate some of the physics. You saw the tank completely flip over there. It's probably safe to say that the physics haven't been nailed down yet, but that's the purpose of them running a test server. What you saw me doing there was checking the player list to see if there were actually any enemy aircraft for me to shoot at, and unfortunately I managed to pick a game, the first one ever in the Flak Panzer, in which none of the enemy team were flying aircraft. However, it does allow me to demonstrate the use of artillery. Now, you saw me mentioning earlier on that you had to go in and set up your action keys. And you can see I have action key 1, which selects my ammunition type, and action key 5, which calls in an artillery strike. And that's what I've just done there. So pressing 5 on your keyboard brings up the targeting cursor for artillery. Unfortunately, it's pretty difficult to... how can I put this? There we go. You can see me trying to bring in the artillery on that enemy KV parked all the way over on the other side of the map. Now, it is difficult to actually determine the results of your artillery fire, so what we're going to do is, purely for demonstration purposes, I'll call in a barrage a little bit closer so you can get some idea of what it looks like and how long it actually takes for the artillery support to arrive. So the barrage is ready. I designate the target area. Artillery fires. And then we just wait for the shots to arrive. And if you look down there just below the hill, you will eventually see, and it does take some time, the shots starting to arrive. And it pretty much seems to take as long as the cooldown of the artillery itself in order for the shots to arrive. You can see there I'm already calling in the second artillery strike when the first one is still completing its fire mission. You may also have noticed that there's no guarantee it's actually going to hit anything. Right? It actually targets quite a wide area, and the points that it hits in that area are completely random. It's entirely possible for you to completely miss an enemy tank with it, and there is a substantial delay between you selecting the target area and the shells actually arriving. So it's almost useless against moving targets, and it's very, very difficult to accurately judge exactly where you're calling the fire mission on at anything beyond medium range, just due to the way the targeting cursor works for the artillery fire mission. So in that respect, I know a lot of people were thinking, oh, this seems a bit overpowered, but it does seem fairly balanced. And if you're in a machine like a flak panzer, when there are no enemy players in aircraft on the map in which you find yourself, or a Panzer 2C, for example, with only a 20mm autocannon, then it does at least give you something that you can use to contribute towards damaging the enemy team. So the biggest concerns that people seem to have... What the hell was that? Well, that's one of the biggest concerns that people seem to have with the test server at the moment, is that the vehicles, it's the physics. The vehicles don't really seem to move the way people would expect them to move. Everything, the physics haven't quite been nailed down yet, and a lot of the vehicles feel much lighter than you would expect them to be. And there are probably very good reasons for that, and the chief reason is probably that the physics haven't been nailed down yet. It's a test server, that's what it's for. Also, they almost certainly haven't finished tweaking the characteristics of things like the suspension and the suspension upgrades and, you know, things like that. Again, it's a test server, that's what it's for. At the moment, I am finding it difficult to judge the effectiveness of various different equipment upgrades. I'm working through, and I've almost completely unlocked everything here on the Stug. I have unlocked everything on the Flak Panzer, and I hadn't really noticed that much of a difference between a fully upgraded machine and a machine without any upgrades whatsoever. But again, like I said, test server. These things are constantly being tweaked, and that's exactly what the test server is for. Again, must emphasise, none of this is representative of final gameplay. As you can see, there is a sniper view in-game, and it is not just in historical battle mode. You access this view in your tank by pressing the V key, exactly the same as swapping between different view modes when you're flying your aircraft. And you can see at the bottom of the screen there, button 1 and 2 are what I use to select my ammunition choices. At the moment, all I have unlocked here on the Stug is standard armor piercing and high explosive anti-tank ammo. Obviously the high explosive anti-tank ammo I've selected by pressing the 2 button, because it's much better at engaging tanks at that kind of range where the penetration is constant at all ranges, whereas if I was using armor piercing, I would have less than 87mm of penetration firing at targets 300 meters away. High explosive anti-tank, same penetration regardless of distance. The normal AP ammo I need to select at targets that are at close range, where it has better penetration than the high explosive anti-tank. And that's why, before you start a battle, you need to go into your controls, miscellaneous, and set the action buttons to correspond to buttons 1, 2, 3, 4 and 5 on your keyboard. So that allows you to actually swap between the various different ammunition types and call in your artillery barrage when you've got it unlocked. By default, those keys are not defined. Now you may notice some peculiarities of the spotting system. And again, I don't know if this is working as intended or it's just something that they're continually going to be tweaking. And it probably is something that they're continually going to be tweaking. But you may, from time to time, I mean you can see their enemy tanks spotted because I can see their names. But they're kind of greyed out, which means that they're not in direct line of sight to me. So somebody else is spotting them. But there now, his name just lit up in bright red, which means I have a direct line of fire to him, and I'm having problems getting the Stug on ground level enough for me to get the gun down on him. But occasionally, you're going to see... Oh crap, I'm firing high explosive. I'll just switch to armor piercing, and I should start hurting him. Come on. There we go. Yes. Where were we? Yes. Occasionally, you're going to see an enemy tank. And he's quite clearly visible to you in the game, but he doesn't have a name over his head. And what that means is that he just has not been spotted by the crew of any of the tanks on your team. But the game still renders his tank, and if you happen to be looking in the right direction and see him, you can shoot at him and kill him. And that's quite important because it demonstrates a difference between the spotting system in War Thunder and the obvious comparison which people are going to be making, World of Tanks. Because if that exact same situation occurred in World of Tanks, that enemy tank, just the game engine wouldn't even render him on the battlefield, because none of the crews of any of the friendly tanks had spotted him. War Thunder doesn't do that. Everything is rendered all the time, regardless of whether it's been spotted or not, and if you happen to be looking in the right direction and you can see him, you can shoot at him, regardless of whether or not any of your tank crews have spotted him and marked him as a target. And I think that a lot of the problems that people are having, and a lot of the concerns that people have about the way War Thunder's tanks play, is 100% down to the fact that they're coming to this from World of Tanks. And they're assuming that because they're good at World of Tanks, they're going to be good at this too. That's not necessarily the case. These are two completely different games. They're superficially similar only in that they're both about tanks. Other than that, they couldn't be more different. The first obvious difference is that there are no health bars. Anybody can one-shot kill anybody else in this game. All you have to do is hit the right part of the tank. And in a game like World of Tanks, having health bars is a good thing. Because it imposes a, unless somebody gets lucky and hits your ammo rack and just destroys your tank in one shot, then yeah, sure. You could argue that anybody can one-shot kill anybody in World of Tanks, but it doesn't happen very often. It happens all the time in War Thunder. And having a health bar works in World of Tanks because you only get one tank in World of Tanks, and that gives you a bit of insurance, a bit of buffer zone against just getting ruffle stomped when you put yourself into a bad position. And it's not terribly realistic, but it works because World of Tanks is an arcade tank simulator, and it's a very, very good arcade tank simulator. You do get an appreciation for just how good wargaming are at what they do, particularly map design, when you spend a few hours on the War Thunder test server. However, the fact that you can get one-shotted very easily in this game is a testament to how comparatively realistic it is. But it also works very, very well, because you're not limited to driving just the one tank. And so while I didn't necessarily want to harp on throughout this video about comparing War Thunder's tanks to World of Tanks tanks, because they are two completely different games, I think it's worth pointing out the differences just to illustrate the fact that they are two completely different games, and they just do not play like each other. Being good at one does not necessarily mean you're going to be good at the other. War Thunder is a lot more gritty, a lot more realistic than World of Tanks. Being good at World of Tanks does not mean you're going to be good at War Thunder. And comparisons between the two games are utterly pointless, and serve only to illustrate just how different they are. If you're like me and you've played a lot of World of Tanks, I fully expect you to absolutely hate the way this plays the first few hours you spend playing it. I certainly did. I thought this sucked. But I'm getting used to it, and the more I get used to it, the more I appreciate the subtleties. The first couple of days I was playing this, I absolutely hated it. And there are still elements of it that I really don't like. The map design in particular. At the moment there is only one map available on the beta test. It's this map, the Karelia map. And I really don't like it very much. But I accept that the reason I might not like it is because I just don't know the map very well yet. It's very campy. And I think it's very campy for a number of reasons. And it's not necessarily to do with the map design, although there are undeniably elements of it that promote camping. This spot that I'm in right now, I've literally just driven out of my team's spawn point, and those enemy tanks have also just driven right out of their spawn point. And straight away, I mean, this is just a killing zone. Right? This is basically where all the noobs go to die. It's kind of like World of Tanks' Corner of Fail on the Arctic map. And I think because you can, and often do, get your tank blown out from under you in one shot, it makes people camp a lot, because they're afraid of losing their tank. And in a game where you can take, 8 or 9 different tanks into a battle, there's no real reason to be so cautious about getting your tank blown away in the same way that you would in World of Tanks. In World of Tanks, you got one tank, that's it. And once it's gone, you're finished. Not so in War Thunder. You can take as many tanks into the battle, or a mixture of tanks and aircraft, as you have crew slots. And so I do honestly think that a lot of the criticisms that are levelled at the Ground Forces beta at the moment, in that the game is very, very campy, are purely because of the hangover that people are bringing into the game from having played World of Tanks, where keeping your tank alive at all costs is paramount. And that's not really the case here, and I don't think people are used to that yet, because you can afford to be more aggressive and less cautious with your tank in War Thunder than in World of Tanks, because if you get your tank blown away, big deal, plenty more where that one came from. Even more so in the beta test, where you have an unlimited number of lives, right? I may only have one Panzer IV F2 to take into the battle, but I can constantly reselect this tank. I can play this tank over and over and over in beta test battles. That isn't going to be the case. Oh, that was a big hit. Yeah, that isn't going to be the case when this thing goes live. But for the purposes of the beta test, I can play this tank over and over and over and over, even though I only have one of them. So there is no reason to be afraid of getting your tank killed. And it should be promoting people to be more aggressive and less cautious. But I just feel that people haven't quite got their head around that concept yet, and they're still trying to play it like World of Tanks. Big mistake. Completely different game. Incidentally, I think those 2 hits that you just saw me take there were high explosive shells, because they made a very impressive flash and a lot of smoke and a lot of flame, but they didn't actually seem to do any damage. So, yeah, the chief criticisms that are currently being levelled at the War Thunder Ground Forces beta test are, it's very, very campy, and, well, it is, but I think I've explained, well, my understanding of the reasons behind that anyway. Your mileage may differ. And also the handling of the tanks. If you're anything like me, your first good few hours playing this beta test, you're going to be fighting the tank as much as the enemy team, because they just don't seem to handle the way you expect them to. And I've largely managed to compensate for this by just not being as heavy on the controls as I normally would be. But that is exactly the... Okay. I just wrecked my tank by driving into a tree that didn't want to fall over. Oh well, never mind. So yeah, watch out for that when when you're playing. Yeah, so anyway. But again, yeah, the tank handling, this is exactly the sort of thing the test server is up for, right? That's why they put it up. They're constantly tweaking it. And again, this is one of those things that it's constantly going to be changing. And it's constantly going to be changing because they're not just tweaking the performance characteristics of the tanks, they're also trying to balance that against... Oh, wow, that looked like a big old artillery barrage that just got called in there. Yes, they're constantly not just tweaking the performance characteristics of the tank, right, from a day-to-day basis, but they're also trying to balance them against the effectiveness of the various different mobility upgrades. So it is in a constant state of flux. It's a beta test. This is exactly what it's for. Now, I mentioned how easy it is to get your tank blown out from under you in one shot. Now, if that happened to you in World of Tanks, you'd be raging. But it happens all the time in ground forces. It's just something you have to get used to. You know, plenty more tanks where that one came from. Just pick another one. Or, if you're in the beta test, pick the same one, because you can use the same tank over and over and over again. But that game is definitely going to be a loser, so I don't think I'm going to bother. Look at that, you can barely see our ticket counter. The enemy have, or they're going to have, all 3 bases. We've lost that one, but yeah, big deal. It's only a beta test. It's not like progress in the beta is going to carry over into the real thing. So that has been War Thunder Ground Forces. I hope you've enjoyed what I've shown you. I hope you found it entertaining. I hope it's answered some of the questions that you might have had. I hope it's provoked some questions based on what you've seen. If there's anything you'd like me to expand upon, by all means, ask your questions in the comments to this video. I will be only too happy to attempt to answer them for you. As always, folks, in the meantime, take care on that battlefield, and I'll catch you next time.